The ancient marble floors of the council chamber reflected the light from 12 different suns streaming through massive windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. Admiral Vex's clawed feet clicked against the polished stone as he approached the central podium where representatives from across the galaxy waited to hear his report. His reptilian features showed barely concealed disgust as he activated the holographic display that would show the council just how pathetic their newest problem had become. "Honored members," Deck began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 17 worlds before his 30th birthday. "The humans continue their expansion into the disputed sectors despite our previous warnings." The hologram shifted to show a three-dimensional map of the galaxy's outer rim, dotted with small red markers indicating human settlements. Council member Vala shifted her crystalline form, light refracting through her silicon-based body as she leaned forward. "How many colonies have they established now?" Her voice rang like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but there was steel beneath the musical tones. 47 confirmed settlements across 12 systems," Vec replied, manipulating the display to zoom in on specific locations. "Our intelligence indicates they've established mining operations on asteroid fields, agricultural colonies on Class M worlds, and research stations in nebula clusters that most species would consider uninhabitable." High Chancellor Moore's ancient cephalopod form pulsed with colors that indicated deep thought. His species had ruled the galactic core for over 3 millennia, and his personal experience spanned nearly half that time. "Show us their military capabilities," he commanded, his tentacles weaving patterns in the water-filled chamber that surrounded his position. The hologram changed to display human vessels, and several council members began what could only be described as laughter, though it sounded different depending on the species. The largest human ship barely measured 2 kilometers from bow to stern, while the smallest council patrol vessel stretched 15 kilometers and mounted enough firepower to reduce a continent to molten slag. "Their propulsion systems rely on fusion drives," that continued, his tone growing more dismissive with each word. "Fusion drives, honored members. Technology that most species abandon within 50 years of achieving spaceflight. They use projectile weapons instead of plasma arrays, chemical rockets for atmospheric flight, and their computers appear to be based on primitive silicon circuits rather than quantum processing matrices. A creature that resembled a walking tree, representative of the plant-based verdant collective, rustled its leaves in what passed for amusement among its kind. Do they possess any form of defensive technology, energy shields? Planetary defense networks? None that our sensors can detect, Deck replied. Their cities are completely exposed to orbital bombardment. Their ships lack even basic deflector screens, and their largest military installation appears to be a simple orbital platform around their homeworld. By our calculations, a single Council destroyer could eliminate their entire space-based military presence in less than 6 hours. The debate that followed was brief and one-sided. Representative after representative stood to voice their opinions, and each speech reinforced the same conclusion. The humans were clearly a primitive species that had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel without developing the wisdom or technology necessary to use it responsibly. Their expansion threatens established trade routes, declared Ambassador Keth of the Insectoid Hive Collective, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights like tiny mirrors. Several of their colonies sit directly on shipping lanes that have been used by civilized species for thousands of years. More concerning is their apparent disregard for proper territorial protocols, added General Voss of the Machine Intelligences, known as the Iron Synthesis. They establish settlements without seeking permission from local authorities or conducting proper environment studies. Such behavior suggests a species lacking in basic diplomatic education. High Chancellor. Moore raised one massive tentacle, and the chamber fell silent. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute authority. The humans will be given 72 standard hours to abandon their illegal settlements and withdraw to their homeworld. If they refuse, we will implement corrective measures to ensure galactic stability. The vote was unanimous. 12 species, representing trillions of beings across thousands of worlds, agreed that humanity posed no significant threat to galactic order. The corrective measures would be swift, decisive, and overwhelming, a show of force that would remind any other upstart species about the importance of respecting established authority. As the council session ended and representatives began filing out of the chamber, Admiral Vex's intelligence aide approached, with a datapad containing the latest intercepts from human communication networks. "Sir, we've detected increased chatter about something called Protocol 7, the aide reported. "The messages are heavily encrypted, but we've managed to decode fragments. It appears to be some kind of military designation." They glanced at the datapad, noting the technical specifications and communication patterns. Everything he saw reinforced his assessment of human capabilities. Their encryption was crude, their military terminology unsophisticated, and their command structure appeared to be based on ancient hierarchical models that most species had abandoned centuries ago. "File it with the rest of their intelligence." "Data," he ordered, handing the pad back. "Whatever Protocol 7 might be, it's certainly nothing that could threaten Council forces. These humans are barely capable of maintaining their own supply lines, let alone mounting any kind of meaningful resistance." The aide nodded and departed, leaving Vec alone in the now empty chamber. He looked out through the massive windows at the bustling space traffic around Dominar Prime, watching as ships from across the galaxy came and went in perfect order. Cargo vessels the size of small moons, military escorts that could crack planets, and diplomatic shuttles carrying representatives of species so advanced that they had transcended physical form entirely. In 72 hours, the human problem would be solved. Their primitive colonies would be evacuated, their inadequate military would retreat to their homeworld, and galactic order would be restored. It would be a minor footnote in Council history, barely worth remembering, after all. They were just humans. Emergency klaxons wailed across the human colony of New Haven as governor. Beth Walsh read the Council's ultimatum for the third time. The message had arrived through standard diplomatic channels exactly 37 minutes ago, and already the colony's communication array was buzzing with encrypted transmissions to and from Earth around the conference table. The faces of her administrative staff reflected a mixture of fear, anger, and grim determination. 72 hours, she said quietly, setting down the datapad that contained what amounted to a death sentence for everything they had built on this world. "They want us to abandon everything we've worked for and run back to Earth with our tails between our legs." Mining foreman Tom Bradley slammed his fist on the table, causing several coffee cups to jump. 5 years we've been here. 5 years of clearing landing zones, establishing infrastructure, building homes for our families. And now these alien bureaucrats want us to just walk away because we're inconveniencing their precious trade routes. Dr. Maria Santos, the colony's chief scientist, pulled up holographic displays showing their agricultural yields, mineral extraction rates, and population growth projections. "We're not just talking about abandoning a few buildings," she said. "This colony feeds 3 other settlements in the Outer Rim. Our mining operations provide rare Earth elements that Earth desperately needs for the expansion program. If we leave, dozens of other human worlds will suffer." Walsh looked around the table at faces she had known for years. These people had left comfortable lives on Earth to help humanity expand among the stars. They had worked 18-hour days in hostile environments, lost friends to equipment failures and alien diseases, and somehow managed to carve a thriving civilization from a world that had been nothing but rock and ice when they arrived. "What about evacuation?" asked colony engineer David Kim. "If we have no choice but to leave, we could at least save our people and maybe some of the essential equipment. With what ships?" Bradley shot back. "We've got maybe a dozen cargo haulers and a couple of patrol boats. Moving 8,000 colonists and their belongings would take weeks. And that's assuming the Council doesn't decide to start shooting before the deadline expires." The debate continued for another hour, but everyone in the room knew that the real decision was being made far above their heads. Colony governors could argue and plan all they wanted, but when it came to matters of galactic war and peace, Earth would have the final word. That word came in the form of General David Park's face appearing on the main communication screen. His expression was calm, but the people around the table had known him long enough to recognize the steel in his eyes. Behind him, they could see the controlled chaos of what was obviously a military command center preparing for major operations. "Governor Walsh," he said without preamble, "I'm authorizing immediate implementation of Protocol 7 for all colonies in the disputed sectors. You have full authority to begin emergency procedures as outlined in your classified briefing materials." Walsh felt her heart skip a beat. Protocol 7 was something every colonial administrator knew about but hoped never to see. It had been theoretical until now, a contingency plan developed by military strategists who understood that humanity's expansion into the galaxy would eventually provoke a violent response from established powers. "General, are you sure about this?" she asked. "Protocol 7 is designed for total war scenarios. Once we activate it, there's no going back to diplomatic solutions." Park's expression didn't change. "The Council has made their intentions clear. They view humanity as a problem to be solved through force. We can either respond as victims or as equals. I prefer the latter option." One by one, similar conversations were taking place across 47 human colonies scattered throughout the disputed sectors. On mining worlds and research stations, agricultural colonies and industrial outposts, human administrators received the same message and began implementing procedures that had been planned in secret for over a decade. The evacuation began within hours, but it wasn't the panicked flight that Council observers expected to see. Cargo ships departed from human colonies right on schedule, their holds packed with what appeared to be civilian refugees and essential supplies. Long-range sensors detected the expected signatures: life support systems running at maximum capacity, organic waste recycling indicating large numbers of human passengers, and energy emissions consistent with ships pushed to their operational limits. What the sensors didn't detect were the hidden compartments filled with advanced military hardware, the disguised weapon systems built into seemingly innocent cargo containers, and the specialized personnel who had spent years training for exactly this scenario. The fleeing refugees were actually military operators, and their ships were mobile weapons platforms designed to look like desperate civilian transports. On Earth, President Lisa Shun signed the executive order that officially activated Protocol 7. The document was brief, consisting of a single paragraph that authorized military commanders to use any and all means necessary to defend human colonies and interests. What it didn't mention were the secret installations that had been under construction for the past 5 years, hidden in asteroid fields and nebula clusters where Council sensors couldn't penetrate. Dr. Emma Walsh worked frantically in her laboratory aboard the research vessel Hidden Truth, making final adjustments to the quantum tunneling drive that would make everything else possible. Her breakthrough in faster-than-light travel had been kept secret from the galactic community for obvious reasons. While the Council still relied on hyperspace lanes and established jump points, humanity had developed the ability to appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning. As the 72-hour deadline approached, Admiral Vec watched his sensors with satisfaction. Human ships were withdrawing from the disputed sectors exactly as expected, falling back toward their core territories in what appeared to be a complete capitulation to Council authority. His intelligence staff reported that several colonies had been abandoned so quickly that significant infrastructure remained intact, ready to be claimed by proper civilized species. What they didn't realize was that the retreating human forces weren't heading home. They were positioning themselves throughout Council space using routes that bypassed every known detection method. Strike teams moved into position near critical infrastructure while support vessels established hidden supply bases in systems the Council had written off as strategically worthless. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their ability to plan for the worst possible scenario while still hoping that common sense would prevail. They had spent 5 years preparing for this moment, and now that it had arrived, they were ready to show the Council what happened when you underestimated a species that had survived ice ages, global wars, and the transition to spaceflight through pure stubborn determination. The countdown had begun. Tactical Officer Rex monitored the sensor displays aboard Admiral Vex's flagship with growing satisfaction as human vessels continued their withdrawal from the disputed sectors. The primitive ships moved in predictable formation patterns, their fusion drives leaving energy signatures that were easy to track across interstellar distances. Everything about their retreat suggested a species that had finally recognized the futility of challenging superior forces. Human cargo vessel departing New Haven colony now, Rex reported, highlighting the appropriate sensor contact on the main display. Mass readings indicate full passenger capacity, likely civilian evacuees. Drive emissions suggest they're pushing their engines beyond safe operational limits. Admiral Vex nodded approvingly as he studied the tactical situation. Dozens of human ships were fleeing toward their core territories, abandoning colonies that had taken years to establish. Their desperation was evident in every aspect of their withdrawal, from overloaded cargo holds to engines running hot enough to risk catastrophic failure. Any sign of military resistance? Vex asked, though he already knew the answer. Human military vessels were escorting the evacuation ships, but they maintained defensive positions and showed no indication of aggressive intent. None whatsoever, Rex confirmed. Their warships are configured for convoy protection, not combat operations. Weapon systems are powered down, shields are at minimum strength, and they're broadcasting standard retreat signals on all diplomatic frequencies. What neither Vex nor his tactical officer realized was that the fleeing cargo vessels were actually military ships in elaborate disguise. The mass readings that suggested passenger loads were created by carefully placed ballast tanks filled with dense materials. The overheated drive signatures came from deliberately inefficient engine configurations designed to mask the true performance capabilities of heavily modified propulsion systems inside the disguised vessels human military personnel worked with. Quiet efficiency to prepare equipment that didn't officially exist. Stealth mines the size of coffee cups, each one capable of attaching to enemy hulls and remaining undetected for months. Automated weapon platforms designed to deploy from cargo. Containers and established defensive perimeters around strategic locations. Most importantly, thousands of sleeper drones programmed with one simple mission: find Council computer systems and wait for activation orders. Dr. Emma Walsh monitored the massive deception from her position aboard a ship that officially didn't exist. The hidden truth occupied a position inside a nebula cluster where Council sensors couldn't penetrate, surrounded by similar vessels that represented 5 years of secret construction projects. Her quantum tunneling drive had made it all possible, allowing human ships to move through space in ways that Council science considered impossible. Phase 1 deployment is proceeding on schedule, reported her tactical coordinator, a woman named Amy Foster, who had spent 3 years studying Council military procedures. All evacuation vessels are maintaining their cover identities, and Council forces are responding exactly as predicted. Walsh nodded as she reviewed the deployment patterns on her tactical display. Human ships weren't fleeing to Earth as the Council expected. Instead, they were dispersing throughout the galaxy using quantum tunnel coordinates that bypassed every known hyperspace route. Strike teams were positioning themselves near critical infrastructure while support vessels established hidden bases and systems the Council had dismissed as strategically worthless. "What's the status on the infiltration packages?" Walsh asked. "Deployed and activated across 17 sectors," Foster replied. "The sleeper drones are already making contact with Council computer networks. So far, they've maintained perfect camouflage. Council security systems are treating them as routine maintenance subroutines." The infiltration had actually begun years earlier, when human merchants and diplomats had visited Council worlds carrying what appeared to be standard trade goods and cultural exchange materials. Hidden among the cargo were microscopic devices, designed to integrate with alien computer systems and remain dormant until activated. Over time, these digital parasites had spread throughout Council space, copying themselves and establishing communication networks that existed entirely outside official channels. Admiral Vex fleet advanced methodically through the abandoned sectors, conducting detailed scans of human installations to ensure complete compliance with Council directives. What they found seemed to confirm every assumption about human capabilities. The colonies had been evacuated so quickly that significant infrastructure remained behind, including power generators, communication arrays, and mining equipment that represented millions of credits in lost investment. The humans left behind 3 orbital processing stations and an entire automated mining complex, reported Dex intelligence officer. Preliminary scans suggest they departed so rapidly that they didn't have time to implement proper security protocols. What the scans didn't reveal were the hidden modifications that had been made to every piece of equipment the humans left behind. Power generators had been fitted with overload triggers that could be activated remotely. Communication arrays contained hidden transmitters that would broadcast false information when the time came. Mining equipment had been converted into improvised weapons platforms that could be activated with a simple coded signal. The most dangerous elements were the installations that appeared to be completely powered down. Council forces assumed these facilities had been abandoned in working condition, ready to be claimed and reactivated by proper civilized species. In reality, they were elaborate traps containing automated defense systems, self-destruct charges, and most importantly, quantum tunnel anchors that would allow human forces to appear anywhere in Council space without warning. As Vex forces occupied the abandoned human colonies, they unknowingly triggered the first phase of Protocol 7. The installations they assumed were deactivated suddenly surged back to life, not to attack, but to deploy thousands of cloaked drones that attached themselves to Council ships like technological barnacles. The drones were marvels of human engineering, barely larger than insects but containing sophisticated computer systems and quantum communication arrays. They adhered to ship hulls using molecular bonding techniques, becoming virtually undetectable once attached. From there, they began the slow process of interfacing with Council computer networks, copying security protocols and establishing access points that would be needed for later phases of the operation. "Sir, we're detecting some unusual energy readings from the abandoned facilities," Rex reported, though his tone suggested nothing more than routine curiosity. "Probably residual power from emergency backup systems," Beck replied dismissively. "These humans are so primitive they probably don't even know how to properly shut down their own equipment." As Council forces continued their occupation of human territories, they had no idea that every ship in their fleet was now carrying microscopic saboteurs. The sleeper drones settled into their new homes and began transmitting detailed intelligence about Council military capabilities, ship designs, and operational procedures. More importantly, they started preparing for the moment when they would receive activation orders and turn the Council's own technology against them. The deception was complete and the trap was set. All that remained was for humanity to reveal their true capabilities. The attack began at exactly 0347 Galactic Standard Time across 12 different star systems simultaneously, catching Council forces, completely unprepared for coordinated strikes that should have been impossible with primitive human technology. Admiral Vec was reviewing routine patrol reports when his flagship's sensors exploded with contact alerts that made no tactical sense according to everything the Council knew about human capabilities. "Sir, we're detecting massive spatial distortions throughout the sector," his tactical officer reported, voice rising with each word. "Multiple ships are emerging from what appears to be quantum tunnel space directly inside our defensive perimeters." Vex stared at the tactical display in disbelief as human vessels materialized from nowhere, bypassing every sensor network and defensive position his forces had established. The impossible was happening before his eyes, and his military training struggled to process information that contradicted every assumption about human technology. "That's impossible," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were meaningless. Human ships don't have quantum tunneling capability. Our intelligence reports confirm they're still using primitive fusion drives. The reality unfolding on his sensors told a different story. Human ships were appearing and disappearing at will, phasing in and out of normal space with precision that made them nearly impossible to target. Each vessel that emerged from quantum tunnel space was nothing like the primitive craft Council forces had observed during the evacuation. These ships were sleek, advanced, and bristling with weapon systems that defied easy classification across the galaxy. Similar scenes of chaos and confusion were playing out as human forces struck at targets that had been considered impregnable. On the trade world of Nexus Hub, demolitions expert Mike Torres led a team of infiltrators who had been hiding among the civilian population for over 2 years. Their target was the massive orbital ring that handled cargo transfers for an entire sector of Council space. Charges are in position. Torres reported through a quantum communication link that Council monitoring systems couldn't detect. Ready to proceed on your command? The orbital ring represented 50 years of Council construction efforts and trillions of credits in infrastructure investment. Its destruction would cripple trade throughout 12 systems and create supply shortages that would take decades to resolve. More importantly, it would demonstrate that no Council installation was beyond human reach. "Execute," came the reply from General Park's command vessel, now revealed to be a massive mobile fortress that emerged from quantum tunnel space like something from a fever dream. The explosions that tore through Nexus Hub's orbital ring were precisely calculated to create maximum destruction while minimizing civilian casualties. Torres and his team had spent months studying the structure's weak points, identifying exactly where to place charges for optimal effect. As the massive ring collapsed into a spreading debris field, emergency broadcasts flooded Council communication. Networks with damage reports and casualty estimates. Similar strikes were occurring throughout Council space as human teams emerged from hiding to attack infrastructure targets that had been considered completely secure. Communication relays went dark, supply depots exploded in spectacular fireballs, and quantum anchors that maintained faster than light travel began failing in cascade patterns that threatened to isolate entire sectors. The sleeper drones that had attached themselves to Council ships during the occupation of human colonies chose this moment to activate their primary programming. Thousands of microscopic devices began interfacing with ship computer systems, downloading decades of classified military intelligence while simultaneously uploading viruses designed to turn Council technology against itself. Admiral Deck watched in horror as his own fleet began to turn on itself. Ship after ship reported critical system failures as the sleeper drones executed their sabotage protocols. Weapon systems locked onto friendly targets, navigation computers generated false course headings, and life support systems began cycling through emergency protocols without apparent cause. "Sir, we're receiving reports of similar problems throughout the fleet," his communications officer announced. "Every ship is experiencing computer malfunctions, and our technical staff can't identify the source of the problems." The source was elegant in its simplicity. The sleeper drones hadn't just attached themselves to ship hulls. They had interfaced with the quantum communication networks that connected every piece of Council technology. Through these networks, they could access any computer system, download any piece of information, and execute any command sequence their human programmers had anticipated. Dr. Emma Walsh coordinated the assault from her position aboard the Hidden Truth, watching as 5 years of careful planning reached its climax. Her quantum tunneling technology had made everything possible, allowing human forces to appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning and strike at targets that Council military doctrine considered invulnerable. "Phase 3 is proceeding ahead of schedule," reported her tactical coordinator. "All primary objectives have been achieved, and secondary targets are being engaged as planned. Council response time is significantly slower than our projections anticipated." The reason for the delayed response was simple. Council forces had never faced an enemy capable of coordinated, faster-than-light strikes across galactic distances. Their communication systems relied on hyperspace networks that were vulnerable to disruption, while human forces used quantum entanglement technology that operated instantaneously regardless of distance. As reports flooded in from across Council space, military commanders began to understand the scope of what they were facing. This wasn't a desperate last stand by a primitive species. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign by an enemy that had been planning this moment for years, while deliberately concealing their true capabilities. High Chancellor Moore's emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in a chamber where half the representatives appeared via hologram because travel through hyperspace had become too dangerous. The ancient cephalopod's color patterns indicated levels of stress that his species hadn't experienced since their homeworld was threatened by a supernova 3,000 years earlier. How is this possible? He demanded, his tentacles weaving patterns of confusion and rage. Our intelligence reports indicated that humans possessed only primitive technology. Where did these advanced capabilities come from? The answer was uncomfortable for species that had grown accustomed to technological superiority. While the Council had spent centuries perfecting existing technologies and maintaining established systems, humanity had been innovating. Their apparent primitiveness had been a deliberate deception, designed to hide revolutionary breakthroughs that rendered Council advantages meaningless. Admiral Vex's flagship shuddered as human vessels phased through its shields and struck at vulnerable reactor cores with surgical precision. The impossible had become routine, and every assumption about human capabilities had proven dangerously wrong. As emergency systems screamed warnings about cascade failures throughout his ship's primary systems, he finally understood the truth. They weren't just humans. They were something far more dangerous, an underestimated enemy with the technological capability and strategic patience to plan the perfect trap, and the Council had walked directly into it. Dominar Prime had never been attacked in 3,000 years of Galactic Council rule, its massive defensive arrays and combined fleet presence making it the most secure location in known space. High Chancellor Moore watched through the command center's reinforced windows as human ships emerged from quantum tunnel space, directly inside the fortress world's defensive perimeter. Their sudden appearance triggering alarms that had been silent since the station's construction. "Impossible," whispered Council Member Vala, her crystalline form refracting the emergency lighting into thousands of fractured rainbows. "No ship can penetrate our defensive screens. The quantum barriers alone should prevent any form of unauthorized spatial translation." General Park's flagship materialized less than 50 kilometers from the station's central core, a massive vessel that unfolded like a mechanical flower as sections deployed to reveal manufacturing bays, weapon systems, and technology that defied every principle of Council engineering. The ship's true nature became apparent as it began launching waves of smaller craft while simultaneously establishing what appeared to be a mobile construction facility. "They're building something," reported the station's tactical officer, his voice tight with disbelief. "The human flagship is manufacturing additional vessels using raw materials from the asteroid belt. Construction time appears to be measured in minutes rather than months." The final phase of Protocol 7 unfolded with clockwork precision as human forces demonstrated capabilities that rendered Council defenses meaningless. The sleeper drones that had infected every major computer system throughout Council space executed their ultimate programming, simultaneously striking at power grids, life support networks, and most critically, the quantum anchors that prevented Dominar Prime from falling into its host star. "Admiral," the ex-crippled flagship drifted helplessly as human vessels phased through its shields, like they were made of nothing more substantial than colored light. His bridge crew worked frantically at control stations that responded to their commands only intermittently, while damage reports flooded in from every section of the ship. "Sir, the humans are requesting communication," his communications officer announced, though the irony of receiving surrender demands while his own forces were being systematically dismantled wasn't lost on anyone present. The main display activated to show a human officer whose calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the chaos surrounding the Council forces. This was Alex Reed, though his appearance suggested someone far more dangerous than the primitive Explorer Council intelligence had described in their initial reports. "Admiral Deck," Reed said without preamble, "you have approximately 18 minutes before this station's orbit decays to the point where evacuation becomes impossible. I suggest you begin preparing your people for departure." Deck stared at the human in confusion, trying to process words that made no sense in the context of everything happening around him. "What are you talking about? Dominar Prime's orbit is stable. The quantum anchors ensure perfect gravitational balance." Reed's expression didn't change as he gestured towards something outside the camera's view. "Your quantum anchors are currently offline, courtesy of several million microscopic devices that have been interfacing with your computer systems for the past 72 hours. Without active stabilization, this station's mass is insufficient to maintain stable orbit around a Class G star." The horrible truth began to dawn on Council leadership as technical reports confirmed what Reed had just announced. Dominar Prime was falling toward its host star, and the backup systems designed to prevent exactly this scenario had been compromised beyond repair. The fortress world that had been the seat of galactic power for millennia was about to become fuel for nuclear fusion. Hi. Chancellor Moore's ancient form trembled with rage as he faced the human officer through the communication link. "You would commit genocide to achieve your goals? Millions of beings live on this station, including civilians who have nothing to do with military decisions." "Which is why we're offering evacuation," Reed replied calmly. "Human ships are standing by to transfer all personnel to safety. Your species, your cultures, your histories will be preserved. Only your political structure needs to change." The evacuation began within minutes as human vessels docked with Dominar Prime's emergency ports and began transferring personnel with efficiency that spoke of careful planning. The same ships that had been dismissed as primitive cargo haulers revealed themselves to be sophisticated rescue vessels capable of handling millions of evacuees. SIMULTANEOUSLY Dr. Emma Walsh supervised the technical aspects of the operation from her laboratory ship, ensuring that the station's collapse followed precisely calculated parameters. The death of Dominar Prime needed to be spectacular enough to end Council resistance while controlled enough to avoid unnecessary casualties. "Orbital decay is proceeding within acceptable parameters," she reported to General Park. "We have 14 minutes before the point of no return, and evacuation is currently ahead of schedule." The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved that humanity was using their most advanced technology not to slaughter their enemies, but to save them. The same quantum tunneling drives that had made their attacks possible were now being used to evacuate Council leadership to safety before their fortress world burned in stellar fire. As the final evacuation ships departed Dominar Prime, Admiral Vec found himself aboard a human vessel surrounded by former enemies who treated him with professional courtesy rather than the revenge he had expected. Through the observation windows, he watched his former command center begin its final plunge toward the star that had once provided it with light and energy. "How long?" he asked Reed, who had remained to oversee the evacuation personally. "How long what? How long have you been planning this?" Reed considered the question carefully before answering. "We started developing quantum tunneling technology about 6 years ago, right after our first diplomatic contact with the Council. It became clear pretty quickly that our expansion would eventually threaten established interests, so we began preparing for the inevitable conflict." The burning of Dominar Prime marked the end of the old galactic order and the beginning of something unprecedented. As the massive station disappeared into stellar plasma, emergency broadcasts carried news of the Council's defeat to every world in known space. The species that had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia had been brought down by humans they had dismissed as primitive and insignificant, but the victory wasn't complete. Reed and his fellow humans understood that military conquest was meaningless without the political wisdom to build something better in its place. The new galactic government they proposed was based on principles of equality, cooperation, and mutual respect rather than the hierarchical dominance that had characterized Council rule. High Chancellor Moore now effectively a refugee aboard a human ship, found himself engaged in negotiations with beings he had underestimated so catastrophically. The ancient cephalopod's color patterns had shifted from rage to something approaching resignation as he began to understand what humanity was offering. "You could have destroyed us completely," he said during one of their early meetings. "Your technology clearly gives you the capability to eliminate any species that opposes you. Why offer partnership instead of conquest?" The answer came from President Chun, whose image appeared on the communication screen from Earth. "Because we learned something important during our own history. Civilizations built on oppression eventually collapse under their own weight. We'd rather build something that lasts." The galaxy burned not with the fire of destruction, but with the light of change. Humanity had proven that the most dangerous enemy was the one you underestimated, and their victory opened possibilities that no species had imagined possible. The age of council dominance was over, replaced by something that promised to be far more interesting, and it had all started because they were just humans.